Welcome back to your next favorite and the season finale episode of the Into Greatness podcast with Jason and Jolene. I am Jason.
And I'm Jolene.
And we have Julie McGue back with us once again, author of Twice a Daughter. Last week we talked the adoption experience, if I can learn how to talk properly, blah, blah, blah. Which was fascinating, Julie, because there was just to hear like your experience and knowing what I've been through and the interesting parallels between all of them, yours and mine. And I think what's going to be interesting this week, talking about belonging, is because I know we sort of touched last week how there was just this kind of need within us, even though we had good adoptive families and adoptive parents, just this sense that things weren't always quite right is the only word that I can use to explain it. So can we go back and talk a bit about that? Like, I guess, when did you find out you were adopted? Let's start with that. How old were you?
So I don't remember when my parents told us. I think I was probably like 3 or 4. So I seem to have always known, and they weren't shy about talking about it and talking about how badly they wanted a family, and to get two of us at once was a beautiful thing. There's an interesting story that I talk about in my book that's coming out in February. My parents were stationed in Germany when they first married, a lot of miscarriages, a lot of infertility. And so they took this side trip to Lourdes, a very famous religious site, and they said a prayer at Lourdes to have a family. And then 2 years later, they got the call from Catholic Charities. Did they want twins? Because my mom had checked the box on the forms. And she said, yeah, absolutely, we do. And then this is family legend. I've heard this story about 50,000 times. But when my mom went to her prayer missal and looked up our birthday, because every day has a feast day associated with it, our birthday is the feast of Our Lady of Lourdes.
Wow.
What's your birthday, Julie?
So, this connection to my parents on their behalf, but also I believe it too. It was proof that we were meant to be their daughters. We were meant to be in this family. We're the oldest, my sister and I. I have a brother 2 years younger, not biologically related to him. He's adopted. And then my parents had 3 biological kids. So this family was a real blended family in the true sense of the word. Not any half siblings or anything, but we were a blended family, and I felt like I belonged in that family. Certainly, I belonged to my sister because I was a full sibling, a full biological sibling, and so the family belonging was very strong.
I love that story. I asked you, sorry, Zoom cuts out. When's your birthday, Julie?
February 11th.
My girls were born on February 22nd, 222.
222. That's so
neat.
cool.
Wow.
And I have a grandson. My youngest grandson is born on my birthday also.
That is crazy. So my cousin had twins born on my birthday. Like, these are the weird little synchronicities you can't make up when you look at all these little invisible strings we all have to each other. And I love that you have that story. Like you said, that's family legend. You've heard it 50 times, because that, like, there was like an innate knowing that I heard from you, and you were like, we were meant to be with this family. So, like a few weeks ago, Jason and I did an episode on kind of like victim culture and that sort of thing, and how life's happening to us instead of for us. In that moment, you talked about that no matter how much difficulty you've had in this journey of being adopted, you still know that this is your journey and this is meant to be your journey.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think if you have that spiritual bent, you do believe that somehow the forces in the universe provided this path for you. Fortunately, Catholic Charities was the vehicle for that. They do not separate twins ever. When in any history have they ever separated twins? So just so blessed that they were the vehicle to keep us together, but also to put us in this family. And I'm sure a lot of the listeners, and you probably have too, seen that documentary, The Three Identical Strangers. triplets that were separated at birth and adopted into different families and studied by a psychologist, nature versus nurture, but also economic status, all of that. Anyway, it's a fascinating show, but also heartbreaking because each one of those boys, once they finally got reconnected, felt through their whole life that something was missing, that a piece of their belonging was off. And when they get reconnected later in life, they struggle with this choice that was made for them, and the belonging that they were later in life discovering within their relationship.
I suspect that the TV show This Is Us really caught your attention when it came out, hey?
Yes.
We used to watch it as well. Yeah, fascinating. So for our listeners, if you don't know, like Mandy Moore was the mom and she had triplets, but I believe one of them died at birth. So they ended up adopting a black baby that was abandoned in the nursery at the time. So they came home with triplets, but one of them was not a blood sibling. And it's like so much around identity, belonging. And then the dad dies. Sorry, spoiler alert here. The dad dies. And now there's also that grief. Like there's just so many compounding pieces there. But yeah, that and the interesting thing is that that's what I think these two episodes really speak to is yes, you can have these unique experiences of adoption and twinship, but it's also like so many people related to that show for so many other reasons, right? So
Right.
yeah, I hope a lot of our listeners that might not directly be impacted by this topic specifically are still taking away huge key components of it.
Well, I think this belonging is something I think everyone wants, right? Like, we all desire to be a part of something. It's why we become like fans of sports teams or join like, like archery clubs or whatever. And just have certain friends groups. We all feel a need to belong. But I know for myself, once I found out I was adopted, like I said in last episode, I even though I was loved and enjoyed being a part of the Hewlett family, there always something that felt a bit off, like I wasn't part of who I am. And then sort of meeting the birth family, meeting a brother who is very similar. Like here's an example. My brother Bill's birthday was yesterday. We're recording this on June 20th. So I sent him, hey, happy birthday message and stuff. And he goes, oh yeah, thanks, Jay. Feeling old as dirt. And it was a quote from a movie. I said, the older the bull, the stiffer the horns. And if you can tell me what movie that's from, I'll buy you a beer next time I see you. And he sent back right away an image from the movie Harley Davidson and the Marlboro Man, which is exactly where that comes from. And it's this obscure movie.
Never even heard of it.
Never heard of it, with Don Johnson, Mickey Rourke, but he knew that because he'd obviously watched it. And just to have that was just a connection that I haven't had with a single Hewlett. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
For
at
sure.
all, like just to have that and showing up at the same celebration of life, wearing the same color shirts and pants. Like it's
Yeah.
suddenly, I feel even though there's a lot, it's a bumpy road and there's still a lot to sort through emotionally, but it feels like when I'm around them, I'm part of that family, even though we've only maybe met in person like 4 or 5 times each.
You got the same weirdness.
Same weirdness.
Yeah, my brother that I found through my adoption search, we not only have the same smile, but we have the same sense of humor, which is kind of dry and cynical. And I laugh at all of his jokes, and he goes, "You and your sister, I mean, that's how I know we're related, because we have the same sense of humor. We have a little bit off of a sense of humor. So it's fun to connect, like you said, with a sibling, even though you didn't grow up with them, you still have this connection. But the belonging piece, I think we start always wanting to belong. Kids, belong on the sports team or the right lunch table or the cheerleading squad or whatever. And I don't think we ever stop searching for belonging. When you move, you want to get your kids in the right school so they feel like they belong. Certainly for me, my husband passed away 2 years ago. And so I'm developing this whole new identity, this whole belonging thing. And I don't always belong with the same people that I used to go out with before. I'm not a couple anymore. So there's this later in life figuring out, well, where do I belong? Do I belong where some of my children live and my grandchildren, or do I belong where I've been living, despite I don't have a spouse anymore? So I think belonging is something that we have to figure out all through life. My mom is in an assisted living facility, and she's figuring out belonging every day. Half the people are either moving to a different unit or they're passing on, and she's got to, develop a new group of ladies that she's sitting with at lunch. So I think belonging is just so universal to everybody's lived experiences.
It's so true. I know with my adoptive mom, when her husband, my dad, died, like she said the exact same thing that you're saying. It's like suddenly whole social groups just ceased to exist for her, which she found really odd, 'cause she was friends with everybody. But when you're not part of a couple, you almost become alienated in an interest. And I don't think it's intentional, but it's just the dynamic is different, right? Like it's
Yeah,
interesting
yeah,
how
because
that happens.
couples go out with couples, and then the women end up talking about everything, and the men are talking. So unless you invite two widows out, you got off numbers. So I'm trying to keep a sense of humor about it, and because I'm a writer, I'm sort of analyzing all of it at the same time to see where I come out on the other side.
And when you think about that, I witnessed my mom go through my dad's death when I was like 17. She's now partnered up, but there was a large period of her life where, and even right now, the life she's living, retired life, right, with her partner, is not the one she wrote with my dad and then worked towards. So that's what the pension was for. That's what the RSPs were for. She's not living out that previous software created. So there has to be an entire like program change of like, oh, we are no longer on this program, and you got to rewrite all that. Well, you're doing that with grief, you're doing that with lack of identity, belonging, purpose maybe looks different at that point, a whole new sense of opportunity, right? Maybe you're going to choose things that you wouldn't have if you were partnered. It's a whole process, right, of rewriting what you've been working the last how many years for. Usually it's from a financial standpoint, right, to free ourselves up to then live out those retirement type years.
Yeah,
Wow.
and I think we go back to our old habits and our old tools too. So for me, being able to write through this whole process and continuing to do things that I used to do before has felt very normal. So I'm not retired, but I do question my sister about this all the time. I said, "Okay, when are you retiring?" Because she works as a sales professional, and she said, "I don't really want to retire." Because I think her identity and her sense of belonging is wrapped up with her job. And I think if you don't develop a lot of interests and other relationships, um, your sense of belonging does struggle.
Yes, absolutely. That actually kind of segues into your new search for belonging in your roots, right? And what we talked about last week's episode around going and potentially connecting with your Chippewa roots and starting to look into what that history is, integrating that into your identity, your practice, any of that sort of thing, right? So what are the pieces that you anticipate or look forward to in terms of, or even fear? I imagine there's a huge amount of fear there in terms of this sense of belonging with that part of your identity.
Well, I think for everybody, how do you start, right? How do you start that process of feeling like you belong? Who do you reach out to? Who invites you in? Like we were talking about on the last episode, I will probably turn to my half brother, who knows more about our heritage, obviously, than I do. He used to go hunting up in Minnesota with my birth father. So he has more connections to place, maybe not so much to people that are still in the tribe, but he would be my introductory person to get connected to this cultural heritage that I don't have.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Oh, it totally is. And as you were saying that, I'm thinking about it, it's belonging is so multifaceted. It is belonging amongst a community. It's also maybe belonging amongst just different demographics, like you talked about, So not only physical proximity of, the people around you, but also now the demographics of age, or like you said, being a widow, or, we go through this in parenthood. Once you have kids and all of a sudden single friends, that looks different. Are you a working individual or not? But then also looking at belonging in terms of, I think about those roots in particular, land, like there is so much emphasis on where are you from? Where are you from? Who are your
Yeah.
people? Where are you from? Where's your land? Right. And I think
Yeah.
that's going to be a really neat place for you. And the more I say that, the more I feel that feeling you had from your mom's voice. Like these are deep sense of roots that I think will just be so, so fascinating for you to explore. And they're not going to be up here. I'm pointing to my head right now, guys. So a lot of your writing and a lot of your adoptee search has been cognitive. A lot of it's been very on that level. This one's going to be integrated. This is going to be an embodied experience for you. It's not
Yeah.
up here. Does that make sense?
It does. And I'll just draw a story from my search for my birth relatives where belonging sort of hit me over the head. So my birth mom, when we first reached out to her through our intermediary, she denied contact with us, which was her right to do, of course. But I struggled with that decision because it meant that I couldn't get at my family history or my medical history, something I needed to do because I had had this breast biopsy. And so I reached out to Catholic Charities and got involved with this social worker. And she invited my sister and I to come to St. Vincent's, which was our orphanage that we lived in for 3 weeks. I had never been there. I knew where the building was. It has been turned into a Catholic resource center to help needy people. But all of the places in that building were places that I lived when I was a child with my sister. Nobody has any records of what we did when we were there because, they just don't keep those records. But anyway, so we did this tour, my sister and and I just was so emotional about this. That was my very first place that I lived. And to go back there and realize, okay, this is the baptismal font where I was baptized. I don't have any pictures of that as a child. That piece of my early childhood were just gone until my sister and I went back. We were in the chapel where my parents received us as infants. So the imagining of all of those stories, because I don't have the oral history, has been really a special thing to write about. And that particular facility, St. Vincent's in Chicago, they do what's called a reunion every year. So they invite back all the adopted adults that were adopted through Catholic Charities in Chicago. And we have a little mass and like a little class reunion. So the adoptees from 1950 stand together with a little sign, and we're like a little graduating class. And they do this every year, and there's a blessing. It is such a sense of belonging to a place that is my history, but nobody else is in my family besides my twin sister. So I think a lot of adoptees go back to place that we were talking about, go back to place that we're trying to understand what our connection is to that place. I have not been back to Rochester, Minnesota, which is where my birth parents met. That could be interesting, but I think more importantly, I think going back to some of the places, like my birth mom lives in Minnesota. I've been back to her hometown. I've been back to her where she taught. So I think those revisiting our roots as we get older helps us kind of say, oh, yeah, I feel good about all this. I feel good about all the places I belong to. And these places and these experiences are the most important to me. And then that's what we pass on to our children about ourselves. These places are important. This is where I belong. And then we've got belonging through our children too.
Mm-hmm.
We have cellular memory of all of those things. So you don't have cognitive memory, but you have cellular memory. Your body has memory of those things too. So that's really neat of what you were experiencing as well. Um, I'm thinking about things in terms of timelines and how times are different now. And I really love that you guys celebrated being adoptees, because I imagine back when you were orphaned, essentially, is what the words would be.
Yes.
There was a lot of shame around that. There was a lot of, internal conflict around there was something wrong with me. I was flawed. These are really common things that I work with people in therapy around, in terms of just the way societally saw them as rejects, for lack of better words, in a sense, like you don't fit somewhere, you weren't wanted. So really kind of, and I'm not saying that was either of your experiences, but it can very much be from back in those days. And I really love that you had a celebration. We are unique, we are celebrated, we are not othered. You're othered in a positive aspect. And then when we take this to cultural race roots, when we look at white or Eurocentric versus indigenous roots, now there is a reclamation and honoring of cultural practices instead of a shaming of and colonization. And looking at, in Canada for sure, it was very much around like they're savages in a sense and we need to rescue them from themselves. So I actually think there's a coming back of belonging and identity that comes with honor and respect and distinction, in terms of being an adoptee, as well as going back to like Chippewa roots and things like that. Is it's actually coming back with honor and giving back belonging and identity that way. Does that make sense? And I don't know if you could
Hmm.
have done that 20 years ago, Julie. I don't think we as a society and world, we're ready for that yet.
Yeah, I agree
Yeah.
with you. I think our society is a little bit more fluid than it's ever been. The shame around being adopted is not what it was. I was matched into the family that I was matched into because my coloring fit my parents. In fact, growing up, my parents, people would say, "Oh yeah, you look so much like your mom," and I'm like, "How
I
do I
heard that
look like
about
my mom?"
my adoptive father too. You guys look so much alike. I would just be like, really? Like,
Yeah,
like,
but back but
okay,
then,
okay.
Jason, they did try to match you. And when I met my birth mom, and she gave me pictures of her when she was 26, which was the same age as my adoptive mom was. Oh my gosh, they look so much alike. So people were completely correct saying, you look so much like your mom. I did look like I belonged in that family. The other thing that was interesting back in those days is I didn't know anybody else adopted besides my sister and my younger brother. There weren't any little adoptee reunions. We didn't celebrate Adoption Day, which was the day that you come home from the hospital or orphanage with your parents. We didn't celebrate those things because that would be calling attention to that stigma of I didn't start out with this family, and it would call attention to my parents' infertility. So it was all hush hush.
I think that's the big one right there. Often adoption is primarily led by infertility and difficulty conceiving. It is also by choice. I don't want to negate that. But yes, that is typically where some of those wounds or, rejection, shame, feeling, inadequate would come from. The other thing when we talk about being ready for some of this is, I think a lot of the healing we've done around colonization and racism and discrimination in North America over the last even just decade, really, in Canada, we've done a lot of reconciliation type practices. I actually think that's going to benefit you going back to your roots, because I don't know if they would have welcomed you as well with such bleeding wounds of colonization 10 years ago,
Mm,
because you are very much a white woman
yeah.
visually, right? And that can just be very triggering as well. And especially when you have any link to a Catholic background. So I think you are coming in with so many variables that could potentially lead to very obvious rejection. And I think you're going to be so embraced, Julie, that there's so much healing that happens personally, but also culturally as well in this rejoicing with you. Like there are multi levels getting recognized at this point, simply because I think the timing is so much better for that now than it may have been 10 years ago.
Hmm.
That's really neat.
I think it speaks. We talk a lot about this on the show, is that everything kind of happens for a reason and at the right time. I think. Yeah, and taking it back a bit, like when you reached out initially, to your birth mom and it wasn't accepted. I know like with my brother and sister, it took them a lot longer. Because I was excited. I was, wow, I got a brother and a sister, but they had known about me for like a couple decades, and so for them, they had to like take that time to process
Yeah.
the fact that I was there. And it was probably the same for her, right? So she needed her time to do that, and it's good that you were able and willing to allow that to happen, because now you guys, like you say, you guys have that good relationship that had there been a forced meeting initially, it might not have even worked out for the best, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, what's also been very interesting is, so while my birth mom took a while to come around to accepting us and welcoming us into her life, she kept that secret still for a while. She was one of a lot of kids. Some of them she felt would have still judged her, even though she was in her 70s when we found her. What's been interesting is the acceptance and with first cousins. So I have several first cousins that I've met in person. It's like we're friends now. It's not that we're just relatives, we're friends. We actually have a lot of fun going out, meeting in Chicago, meeting in Florida. And what's interesting about that acceptance, I think, is they don't have the emotional baggage that the generation above them, the aunts, the uncles, my birth mom, for example, too, they're just like, oh, we're related to her. She's a cousin. I've connected to her on DNA ancestry or 23andMe. And there's this excitement about getting to know one another, this instant feeling of belonging with the first cousins, whereas with the aunts and uncles, there's still a little, oh, okay.
Generational difference, right?
Generational
Yeah.
trauma and healing. This new generation has healed a little bit more. They're more distant from that segregation. That's kind of the piece I was referencing in terms of like what gets triggered for those other bloodlines. But it's also really fascinating because I think most Indigenous cultures have a very collective approach to family. Like they call everyone cousins, aunties, moms, dads, and they are raised by the village. And Western culture and European culture, not the same, what we experience as primarily white individuals, right? So that's actually what you're embraced by as well, is this is their traditional practice. You are family. Like I said, remember when you were trying to, like, we talked about the last name and trying to go through that stuff. And it's like, it does not matter to them. If you are family, you are family. And that's really beautiful because I think that is unique to a lot of, more First Nations, Indigenous culture. Yeah. Wow. That's really cool.
With you said you wrote a book of essays about belonging. Julie, what, I guess sort of just because we only have a few minutes here, but what was that process like for you? Like, was that just born out of just trying to make sense of all that you've been experiencing and jotting those thoughts down?
Well, when I was first getting started as a writer, my writing coach said, you need a platform. You need like a blog, or while you're writing your book at the same time, get your name out there and get established as like an adoption expert. So I started writing essays and publishing them every week. And then I write a column for my local paper here. So after I published Twice a Daughter, I thought, you know what, I'm gonna collect my favorite stories and put them together in a book. And so there were things that happened in the search for birth relatives that didn't go into the book, right? So I had an experience with a family reunion, how I felt about not being invited to a family reunion because my new birth relatives were not ready for me to show up there. That's an essay that I include in Belonging Matters. There's conversations that I had with my adoptive mom surrounding my writing a book and surrounding telling family stories. So there's all these short pieces that didn't have a place other than just sitting on my website. So I collected all of them. I also have stories about my kids and my husband and my family because the extended piece of family, I decided to extend to them. So the essays are about a lot of different things, but they're short. There's a purpose in each one, which is fun about writing an essay, is that you've got to actually make sense. You can go on and on and on and on. And so that was fun for me to do. And I continue to write essays and blogs. So maybe there's another collection another day. Who knows?
That's fantastic. And as a writer myself, it is such a great way to sort through your feelings and
Yes.
emotions, and to find, and even to ask those questions about belonging and how it works. It's I do it
Yeah.
every
And
day.
I
I've done
think,
it for like 20 years, journaled, and was a newspaper reporter and
and that's so important. I think that's, everybody that's listening to your show, you don't have to write for other people to read it. You can just write it for yourself, like you said, to write what you thought maybe you thought, and now you convince yourself you think something differently. So writing to heal, and just writing to know what you think. It's absolutely a fabulous tool to heal from any kind of trauma or a crisis, just to write it out.
And I think when other people get to hear our stories, read our stories, we get to share that here. We also share that on social media stuff. You share it in books, right? Like, it's validating, right? So that's validation for us. But I think we can really give credit where credit is due in terms of I matter. So if we have a core cognition, especially abandonment based and rejection based around I'm not good enough, I'm not wanted, I'm not loved, whatever, we get all of that really hugged and nurtured through hearing and telling stories and having that impact and be heard and cared for and held by others. I matter. What I experience in this lifetime fucking matters. Like, my existence matters, and we all need to find that somewhere in life. And that is a true sense of inner belonging, and a belonging in why am I here? Why am I even here? Right? So we can like massively zoom out of that and be like, what is my existence? There is no question, like without a doubt, you belong here in these two last episodes of our season 2,
Oh, that's
100%.
awesome.
And like Jason and I kind of knew this, but like the minute we started talking to you last week, I was like, this is it. Like I was just so excited, and I have been completely captivated by your story, but also how like Jason and I have like side-eyed each other so many times being like, did you hear that? Did you hear that? Because everything we've talked about in these last 2 seasons really comes to life in these last 2 episodes as well. It all ties in. It wasn't just some random guest interview we did at the end. Like, it's really beautiful how a lot of the things we touched on today are things we've continually touched on for the last 2 seasons. So thank you for belonging here.
Thanks. Well, I think I need to go back and re-listen to some of your older episodes so that I can pull at those threads that you're talking about.
For sure.
I just was going to say, I was thinking about what you were talking about with the writing oral histories down. I gave my sons-in-law, I have 3 of them, a book that I got on Amazon, and it says, "Tell me your story, Dad."
Shut up,
And
Julie.
it's
I did the same.
Did you really?
No,
Oh, that's so cool.
Get out. I did. It says, Dad, I want to hear your story.
Your
And I bought it
story.
for my children's father, my partner, his dad, who is very unwell with cancer, and
Yeah.
for my mom's boyfriend, for all the people in their lives that love them to hear their story. I just did that, Julie.
Yeah. And it was cute because 2 of my son-in-laws were like, "Thank you. This is such a meaningful gift." And it's short. So I hope they use it. We can hope that they'll write something down. I'm
And
just
you
going to
made it.
share one cute little story about my own son, who is the father of the little guy who's born on my birthday. I only have one son. So when my book Twice a Daughter came out, that you get the advanced reader copies, and it didn't hit the bookstores for about 5 more months. So they all got a sneak peek at it. And I happened to be with him on an airplane, and he was sitting across the aisle from me. And I looked over at him, and he's crying. And he was almost 30 years old at the time. And I said, "What's the matter? Are you okay?" And he said, "Mom, I just had no idea that you went through all of this. I had no idea what adoption meant to you or any of your story. And so, circling back to these books that we just gifted people for Father's Day, if we don't write those stories down, something is going to get lost and it's going to not feel as important to the next generation. It's important to write our stories the way we want them to be told, what we want to convey to family.
I just love that so much. I feel that to my core, absolutely, because there is so much value your story has to other people. What I have been through matters to them, and it completes the way they experience you, the way he saw you as a mother, all of those pieces. That's so beautiful. That is a gift. Like, we can leave this world gifting people with things that we didn't even know they wanted as gifts. And it's those stories, it's those things. Like, that's how I keep my dad's memory alive, is I talk about all the things. My mom talks to my kids about them. They feel connected. My son even just said during a math quiz, he talked to grandpa. Like, he's never met grandpa, but he knows. He's like, I asked him for his help. All the things, right? I knew he was really good at math, Mom. Those are ways that we equipped people to keep our memories alive, which are essentially their existence as well. That's so beautiful, Julie. And you're passing down the writing routes and you're making it easy and achievable for them because they're like prompted journals, right? Yes.
I hope.
I love
Yes.
that.
Julie, where can people find you again?
Julie McGue, author.com is my website. And then my 2 books, Twice a Daughter and Belonging Matters, are available wherever books are sold.
Fantastic. And we look forward. I'm going to now go back and read them. And I'm looking forward to your next book. Thank you for joining us on our final 2 episodes of the season, Julie. It was great to have you on.
Thanks for having
and
me.
that's it
It's
for
great
us.
fun.
Yeah. I look forward to books 3 and 4.
And we'll return next season with a whole bunch more of your favorite episodes of the Into Greatness podcast. Until then, I'm Jason.
And I'm Jolene.
Talk soon.